My first 2 years of college at Virginia Tech, I lived in a live and learn community. What this meant was that the entire dorm building that I lived in was dedicated to people of different STEM majors. While there were numerous benefits to living in the community, one of the biggest draws for me was the peer-to-peer mentoring program. Most of the building was for freshmen, but every 6 months would be sophomores serving as mentors. Each block of 6 rooms was split up, so one sophomore would mentor like 5 freshmen, and their roommate would mentor all of the other 5 freshmen's roommates. It was a neat little system that created an even tighter community within the building. My roommate, Melissa, and I, we enjoyed living there so much that we both decided to sign up as mentors for our sophomore year. In fact, I was so excited to mentor that in the summer before classes started, I put up a post on the community Facebook page welcoming the new class of freshmen and encouraging them to ask me any questions that they may have about the university, the community, classes, etc. A lot of kids commented on the post with their questions. I answered everyone with a comment of my own and either got a like or a quick thank you back, and that was that. A few kids ended up reaching out to me in my DMs to ask more embarrassing questions, like how the shower situation in the dorms worked, or how to deal with a bad roommate, or whatever. Almost every single question was answered, thanked, and then the conversation ended. Well, all of them except for one. David's questions started out like any other. He sent me a DM and said something like, "Hey, I saw your post for incoming freshmen and I wanted to ask about your favorite spot to eat on campus." I answered, "Owen's, of course," and thought the conversation would die there just like all the others that had come before him. But David kept asking questions. At first they were innocuous. Things like, "How did you find all your classes around campus?" or "What are your game days like?" Some of his questions I had already answered publicly in the comment section of my original post, but I figured that he must just be shy and he was just trying to branch out in his own way. When it became clear I would keep responding to David no matter how many college questions he asked, he started to shift away from questions and sort of moved on to everyday conversation. There were a few moments when I wasn't sure if David was trying to flirt with me or not, but he didn't come on too strong like most of the frat boys that I'd encountered, so I brushed past it and kept talking to him normally like a friend would. Who knows, maybe he would become an actual friend and not just some rando who asked me questions over the summer. Well, we talked off and on for several days over Facebook Messenger. Despite my attempts to stick to simple topics like moving to a new state for school or hobbies, David kept trying to steer the conversation in odd directions. He brought up the war in Afghanistan unprompted and asked me what I thought about it. I learned my freshman year that going to a school in a deep red part of the state meant that politics was not a friendly topic for me with most people, so when he asked this, I tried to sort of pivot away as fast as possible by lying and saying that I don't really follow the news all that much. He kept pressing by telling me that he was really into the strategic part of wars and that the generals really messed up the execution of the war. Stupid me asked why, and he went on this entire rant about how we should have bombed towns off of the face of the planet to get rid of the terrorists. The whole conversation was so out of left field, but I felt compelled to challenge that. I said, "Well, that would be insane. What about all of the innocent people living there too?" To which he responded, "Well, to heck with them. They're in a town with terrorists and the terrorists have to die. It's just simple math, really. A couple of hundred innocent people die in the process of stopping thousands from dying. How do you not see that?" Those are just the words that really stuck in my head verbatim, but he sent walls and walls of text talking about how everyone remotely in the vicinity of bad people deserved to die too, just by physical proxy. I was completely weirded out by that, and I didn't respond. After a few hours left on read, he said, "I really thought that you were one of the smart ones, but I guess you're just as soft as all the rest of them." I sent screenshots to my roommate Melissa so we could what the heck together about it all. We both agreed, though, that it was a really out-of-pocket take and to stay far away from this dude come August when we'd be living in the same building as him. Months went by and he just became a sort of silly footnote in our lives, really. A weird, get a load of this freak that I met story for our friends to laugh about. That was until the spring semester of the sophomore year when one of the worst weeks of my life unfolded before me. One of Melissa's mentees came to our dorm room sobbing one day. She told us that one of her good friends, Nicole, had just been arrested and she didn't know what to do. Nicole was in the mentee's Facebook profile picture, so the cops were asking our mentee to come down to the station and be questioned. We asked what Nicole did to be arrested, figuring that it must have just been weed or underage drinking or something relatively chill like that. Instead, in between sobs, she answered, murder. She helped commit a murder. Obviously, this floored both Melissa and myself. We asked for the details, so she pulled up a news story that will forever be burned into my memory. There, on the front page of the news, was Nicole and a boy that I immediately recognized as David. The following details I only learned through the years of trial after the fact. So David and Nicole had struck up the weirdest romantic relationship that I had ever heard of. Apparently, they both got off on the misery and the pain of others. So much so that David had seduced a 13-year-old girl from the next town over into going on a date with him. He snuck her out of her house and drove her into the woods. Once they parked in the middle of nowhere, Nicole jumped out of the back seat and together, well, you can imagine the rest. They also made love right there in the car around her. My roommate's mentee and I both ended up talking to the police together. Her to explain her innocent friendship with Nicole, and me to share my weird Facebook messages between David and I months prior to the murder. I will never get this murder out of my head. I feel like there was so much more that I could have done to stop this freak from killing that girl. I mean, I saw the red flags. I saw firsthand how he was prone to insane takes about violence, and I decided to ghost and distance myself rather than do something about it. I showed my friends the messages, and we all just laughed about how insane he was. I wish just one of us would have stopped laughing long enough to have questioned it, just a little bit more at least. My takeaway to the people listening to this is to not brush things off like this. If you feel like something is off with someone, and I mean really off with someone, say something to someone in authority, please. I probably would have gone to my community leaders at least if I had done this. The actual faculty members who are paid to watch over us kids. If I had done that, then maybe, just maybe, that young girl would still be alive. I'm a music student and at a small town university in Canada. Since I was staying this summer and not going back home, I asked the director of my program for a key to the rehearsal room so that I could stay fresh over the summer and have a designated practice space. The building, it's very old, musty, and has so many hallways, open spaces, practice or green rooms, stairwells, etc. It sits near a walking trail in the woods too, on the other side of a marsh and then a large basin that leads into the ocean. I had classes in this building during my first term and have spent a lot of time in there too. I never once felt uneasy while spending time alone in the building, whether during the day or at night. Sometimes I would stay and play music until like 1 or 2 in the morning, and I would only ever see the security doing their 11 p.m. patrol. I never had any issue, and they always announced their presence if knocking or coming around a corner when they were out of sight. The other night, though, I was in this large room that I cleaned and converted into a sort of studio or rehearsal space, I suppose. It used to be a woodshop for theatre students, and there are 2 ways in. through a main large double door that leads into the common area, a fire exit, a main auditorium and a theatre, etc. And the other entrance is through the percussion room door, which is then secured by another door, which basically means that when I'm in there, I'm locked in from both ends. Now, the other night while I was practicing, I heard a door open from out in the hallway and just assumed it was another one of the 5-ish students who were also staying over the summer. No big deal. A little while after that, I heard some of the music students returning gear from a show that they played that evening. Again, no big deal. One of them even came and knocked and announced themselves, just wanting to say hello, knowing that I was in that big room rehearsing because I had a lamp on. A few hours after that, probably around 1:30 a.m., I started to wind down and pack things up. Technically, I'm actually not supposed to be in there that late, but I have an important show coming up and have been practicing hard. I'm sitting down near the large double door and I can hear footsteps on the other side. I sort of freeze up and stop what I'm doing, just to listen a bit. There is a sort of hole in the wall too, probably 1.5 meters squared, where I assume an exhaust vent used to be installed to remove sawdust and all that when the theatre students would be building props. And while cleaning the room and turning it into my rehearsal space, I put a sort of thin piece of plastic over this hole. Not for any reason, I just sort of found it while cleaning and was like, that would fit right in that hole. So I just put it there. Now, as I'm sitting in the chair continuing to quietly listen, staring at the door, I literally see someone bend down and look into the hole, into the practice room, at me, and then quickly straighten back up and out of sight. The hole is probably at thigh height, and I was so focused on the door and looking at the crack underneath that I only caught this person out of the corner of my eye, and then they quickly moved away from it. So I barely saw who it was, but they were wearing brown and had black hair. No other student matches that description, and security would not do that. They're pretty tough and always announce themselves, demand that I open up and show student ID and all that. Especially not at like 1:30 a.m. They would have for sure kicked me out and probably have been pretty ticked off that I was there at that time. So I sort of froze, not knowing what to do. I nervously just asked, "Hello, who's that?" And nobody answered. I felt so creeped out and spooked that I just sort of sat there in absolute silence, waiting for a sound or someone to be like, "Oh hey, it's just me, I'm messing around with you." But nothing. I sat there for a literal 5 to 10 minutes as well, looking around quietly, goosebumps and just spooked. After maybe 5 or 10 more minutes, I could hear the sound of someone walking away towards the front of the building, like the sound of jeans rubbing together as they were walking and a jacket and all that. Well, I packed up quickly, leaving most of my music stuff up, and just exited through the main door and out of the fire exit as fast as I could. Luckily, I live like 5 minutes away, but I was checking over my shoulder to make sure that nobody was following me the entire time. Whoever that was, it freaked me out, and I know all the music students who are studying over the summer, and they for sure would have said hi or something at least. Security would have kicked me out 100% as well, and my only worry is that it was someone doing sneaky stuff or trying to steal something from the school, or maybe something worse than that. Security usually comes around 11 p.m. every night and locks all the doors. The main doors are open all day and over the summer as well. Anybody can just walk into the theatre and wander around for a bit. And I'm worried that someone was trying to sneak in there overnight and wandered in that night, found a secluded room in some long hallway and was trying to hide out or something. And then they must have heard music late at night and came down to explore. I don't know, but it spooked me a lot, and now I'm afraid to stay late and practice anymore. I should bring it up to security so that they're a little bit more thorough, but I'm not saying that all squatters are bad or dangerous or whatever, but it was just a very eerie and unexpected creepy encounter, especially given the fact that That person was standing there, just outside of that door, for at least 5 or 10 minutes, maybe just waiting for me to pop out. This happened to me, 33 and male, in late 2016 till early 2017. I was in the military, stationed in Tampa, Florida. I was 24 years old at the time. So I had a roommate who was also in the military at the time. We had been living together since we first moved out of the dorms on base. He got selected for deployment, and I couldn't find a new roommate, so we ended up breaking the lease. I then got an apartment by myself. Now, nothing strange happened at first. It wasn't my first time living alone too, but something about the place just made me feel uncomfortable. It wasn't a cheap apartment though, and only I had a year left till my contract was up and I would separate from the military service, so I ended up sucking it up and I stayed. Bad decision. I started to get sleep paralysis. I had never heard of it or even experienced it before this. Naturally, as you can imagine, I freaked out. But the longer that I stayed in that apartment, the more frequent it would happen, till eventually it was pretty much an every night thing. I would wake up, unable to move, and would see a dark figure standing in my bedroom doorway. It would just stand there and stare at me. It had this sort of melting look to it as well, as if parts of it were going to drip off of it. I went and saw a doctor. He told me about sleep paralysis, explained to me what it was and that it was probably just stress that was causing it. I believed him as everything that he said lined up with what I was dealing with. However, soon afterwards, things escalated. I started feeling like something was trying to drag me off of the bed at night when I'd awake. Still unable to move or even make a noise though. If you have problems with sleep paralysis yourself, then you'll know what I mean, but my voice just would come out in sort of croaks. And when I would snap out of the paralysis, I would be in bed in my usual sleeping position as if nothing had happened. Then, one night, that all changed. Instead of feeling like something was dragging me off of the bed, I actually was dragged. Something grabbed my arm and pulled me down between the bed and the wall. My arm was stuck and I could feel a hand around my forearm. This was not sleep paralysis. I was wide awake both before and even after this event. The last event, it was the one that finally made me move out, and happened a few weeks before my lease was over. So, I had fallen asleep on my stomach and woke to the same feeling, unable to move or speak. The feeling of someone watching me and then a sort of pressure on my back. It felt like someone or something was sitting on my back, and I swear that I could feel it breathing on the back of my neck. What snapped me out of the paralyzed state, though, was a searing pain across my back. I immediately shot up and left the apartment, and when I went to go and check my back, I had 3 long scratch-like claw marks down my back that I knew were not there beforehand. I ended up not breaking the lease and just sort of crashed at a friend or co-worker's place for the past few weeks of my enlistment. I only ever went to that apartment to grab my stuff and I was out of there. So let me start this off by saying that this is certainly not my proudest moment in life. It's definitely in the top 5 for the scariest, but I'm not proud of the stupid situations that I'd get myself into just to get my hands on some weed. For the record too, growing up, I had an amazing family that knew nothing about my habit. I was a sneaky kid who was best friends with another very sneaky kid, so they knew nothing. Anyway, this story happened back in 2015 when marijuana was still pretty legal here in Michigan. My friend, Katie, and I were both 15 and recently discovering the fun effects of weed, but also discovering how hard it is to find it in our little middle-of-nowhere small town. Here, everybody knows everybody, so you can't exactly be 15 and just go around asking for weed. Especially without the risk of what you're up to getting back to your parents, which to us at the time would have been the worst case scenario. We feared our parents more than the police, really, so them finding out about us smoking weed was really a no-go, which is how we found ourselves in the crossfire of a crazy drug deal. So, it all started one summer afternoon. We got out of school, the last day of school before summer break. Katie and I decided the best way to spend it was getting our hands on some weed, smoking ourselves stupid basically, and spending the afternoon high as a kite in her treehouse. It was a very cool treehouse, by the way. I don't know exactly how Katie found this new dealer as well, but her usual hookup was out of stock or something. She said that it was through a friend of a friend or whatever, and I don't have any clue which friend it could have been. I was a very shy kid, so a lot of Katie's friends were not mine, but nonetheless, Katie always had the hookup for weed in the past, so I didn't doubt her when she said that she could score us some. Later that night, Katie's phone pings, and it's that friend of a friend letting us know the time and the location that the dealer can meet. 11 p.m. at the local ice cream joint. Luckily for us, the local ice cream joint closes at 8 p.m., has no security cameras, and conveniently enough butts right up to our neighborhood. So it was about a 10-minute walk since neither of us had a driver's license yet. Our neighborhood is very rural, mind you. Besides the big red barn that is the ice cream shop in front of the neighborhood, the rest is just small houses with nice-sized yards and really just a big swamp in the back. In any case, we got to the ice cream shop just before 11. We were told to bring $20 for the weed and an extra $10 for the delivery and the gas. We were waiting by the windows at the front of the building where you'd usually order if the place was open. The entire parking lot is only dimly lit by one flickering bulb at the far corner of the lot, so the area that we chose to wait was nice and dark, which we thought at the time was a good idea, being that we're about to buy an illegal substance and all. 11 p.m. rolls around, and we don't see any vehicles making their way to us. It's dead and quiet, and then suddenly we hear a shuffling coming around the corner of the building. One man dressed in all black with a ski mask on turns the corner and asks, "Are you Katie?" To which Katie replies, "Yeah." The man only looks over his shoulder towards the side of the building that he approached from and jerks his head in our direction, like he's signaling someone to follow him, which is exactly what happened. Two more men dressed the same as the first turned the corner. Now we're met with three men, dressed in all black, faces covered and twice our size. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why didn't we run? Why didn't we see the million red flags right in front of us and take off? Well, at first we thought that we were cool kids that could handle an easy-peasy drug deal, and we really wanted the weed as well. Plus, drug dealers wearing ski masks isn't all that weird, right? So, really there's nothing to worry about. We stayed put, imagining a scenario where this doesn't end badly, and we walk home safely with our stash and we smoke. Though, unfortunately, that did not happen. Katie, with a wary voice, speaks up and says, "Do you have our weed or no?" To which the men chuckle and one replies with, "I need to be paid first." Katie takes the $30 out of her pocket and holds the money outstreaked in front of her. The men don't move. The man who spoke previously says, "Nah, we'll need something more than that." Katie looks at me confused and scared. I return the same look. The man speaks up again and says, "We'll be nice, we don't bite. Just hand me the money and let the boys take a good look at you." Katie and I don't budge. "Come on," the man drags out. "You girls are probably still virgins, right? How cool would it be if you get to tell your friends that you got you-know-what tonight? My boys will treat you right. I just want to watch, I promise." My head snapped back to Katie. It took just that one look of "we're in deep trouble" from her for me to understand that we were now in a serious pickle and she was about to run. And run she did. We both noped the heck out of there quickly. We ran and looped around the opposite side of the building away from the men. I turned to see two men right on our heels though, and I don't know where the third one has gone. We ran straight down the street into our neighborhood. Obviously running down the street was not doing us any favors, but we were too visible and we couldn't risk running home and the men knowing where we live. We needed to hide. Luckily, we were gaining a bit of distance from them. Though they were twice our size, we obviously had twice the stamina. I thought that if we keep running, that we would gain enough distance to lose them and we could make our way home eventually. But unfortunately for us, once I had that thought and turned to check the progress of the two men behind us, I saw a vehicle pull up beside them. It had to be the third man. He must have left to retrieve the getaway car while the other two chased us. There was no way that we were outrunning a car as well, so we had to think quickly. As the men were jumping into the car, I grabbed Katie by the arm and pulled her down a side road opposite of the direction of our homes. She screeched, "What are you doing? Let's go home." I hushed her though and pulled her behind a vehicle in the driveway of the house that we were in front of. I informed Katie why we can't go home and that they now have a car. They'll catch us before we can get there. We need to hide, and Katie just nods and follows me. The car now is slowly stalking the side road that we ran down. We're both crying by this point and gulping down air, trying to catch our breath while we slip through the connected back roads towards the swamp. I don't know why, but the swamp seemed like the safest place to go at the time. They couldn't drive through it, I guess, and I just prayed to any god listening that they wouldn't follow us through it either. Now, though, as an adult with a fully developed mind, if this happened today, I would totally run up to any of the dozen houses that we passed and bang on the door for help. I'd scream my head off in an attempt to deter the men. I'd call 911 and I would fight my way free if I had to. But again, at this time, by all means necessary, we could not take any chances of our parents finding out about this because obviously being grounded for the summer was a bigger threat than 3 masked men. So thus we kept running. We make it about halfway to the swamp. We have to cross the front yard of the house that we were hiding behind, cross the road and run to the tall grasses and coverage of the swamp. But of course, because whatever god was listening while I was praying wanted to punish me for being so stupid. So just as we were running across the road, the car whips around the road and full throttles right toward us. I sprint for the swamp, Katie right behind me, and the second that we hit the swamp, we sink almost to our knees. We run and drag ourselves deeper and deeper through the cattails and the reeds until the muck loosened up and we're swimming in about 5 feet of water now. I make it about almost halfway through the swamp by the time that the car comes to a sliding stop and the 3 men jump out. We crawl through the muck on the other side and we lay between the foliage, watching the men from a distance, once again praying that the men don't feel like going for a swim. They stand at the edge of the road. One man takes 2 steps and sinks in the muck instantly, just like we did. He steps back and shakes off his boot, cursing. He says, "Come on, don't make us come in there after you." And he was absolutely furious now. The other 2 men walk in the opposite directions along the swamp's edge, scanning for us. The third man calls out again, "I know you're in there. I saw you. Your footprints are right here. I still have your weed. Come out and I'll give it to you for free. I promise." Well, to heck with that guy and his promises. Katie and I, we don't move. We don't make a single sound, in fact. Both of us hold our breath and we wait. The swamp, it's cold and squishy and stinks awfully bad, but we don't budge. After what feels like maybe an hour, or more realistically like 5 minutes though, maybe 10, the 2 men, they come back to the third and one of them mentions the fabulous idea of leaving because they cannot find us. There was no way in heck that they were going to get into that swamp, and the likelihood of them getting caught, it's pretty great considering that they're in a neighborhood, so no matter how rural, there is always still the potential of neighbors being awake and watching. And like the gods have finally answered my begging prayers, the men finally get in their car and leave. We lay there for over an hour to make sure that they were really gone before we started to crawl out of the swamp and use the back of the houses and trees as coverage to make our way home, all the while staying as far away from the road as possible as well. We hopped so many backyard fences that night that we became professionals, basically. We make our way back to Katie's house. We slip through the back door, both take turns in the shower, hide the evidence of our mucky clothes in the treehouse, and have a very restless night watching out the front window, waiting to see that car again. Thankfully, though, we never did. The next morning, we tore a hole into the friend of a friend for the terrible dealer hookup, but it turns out that he wasn't the dealer that the friend originally sent to us. The original dealer apparently said something about not wanting to deal with a couple of broke kids, so he sent his sketchy roommate in his place to make the delivery instead. When we shared the story of what the roommate and his partners in crime tried to do to us, and what followed after, no one believed us. I guess that once the sketchy roommate got home, he spun his own story about how he showed up with no money and offered him sex instead, to which he refused and he left. It seems the story of the adult drug dealer was more believable than the story of a couple of 15-year-olds, I guess. And so, that was that. We cut ties with the friend of a friend, the dealer, and stuck to stealing the half-smoked doobs from my neighbor's ashtray when Katie's usual dealer was out of stock. I have a lot of crazy and fun memories with my dear friend Katie. Sadly, in 2018, she passed away from a bad car accident. Her brakes failed on the highway and she wasn't wearing a seatbelt at the time. I would give anything to spark one up and just talk for hours in that treehouse with her again. And though not today, we will again, someday. So my girlfriend and I encountered something very strange this weekend. We trail run and it's sort of become our thing, really. Yesterday too, we found a trailhead that was up towards the mountains, about 2 hours away from Seattle, pretty remote. So we left early and got to the trailhead at about 8 a.m. The trail was particularly difficult too, steep enough that we found ourselves walking pretty often. In retrospect, we probably should have been surprised by what we saw next. So midway through our run, in a steep descent part, we pass a lone hiker and think absolutely nothing about the encounter. Alone, maybe 65 to 70, and wearing all white. The clothes were modern, looked perfectly placed for today. Hiking pants, vest, hat. He had one hiking pole and a backpack as well, all white. Again, modern clothes and didn't really stand out as strange or anything. We say hello, but he says nothing back. We were running, so there was really nothing rude, and we simply ran past her. We continue, and it gets harder, but we progress nearly 3 miles uphill. We get to a point where the trail becomes sort of an overgrown forest road in a small clearing. At this point, the road begins to get very, very overgrown quickly. So we crest a small ridge and suddenly we see a hiker. It's been 30 minutes since we saw the older lady in white, yet he was a hiker with the same outfit. There were no forks in our trail, and yet we could have sworn that this was the same person. But that would be impossible, right? The gravity of this didn't hit us yet. So, strangely, we ran past her again. We ran a couple of feet in front, at least, because at that point the road was entirely bushes and not passable. So we turn around. We walk past her a last time, and she says something along the lines of like, "Seems like the trail ends here." It didn't feel eerie yet. In retrospect, though, it was eerie, and we ran back and everything seemed normal until we reflected on why this lady was there in the first place. How would she have even gotten there before us? How could she have even made it up there at all? we just ran 5 miles uphill, steep terrain, and so did this 70-year-old lady. It's been a one-way path and there have been no other turns. The trail that we were on at that point was completely overgrown, enough that we had to turn around, so why was she there? How did she get there? And if she was the same lady, then how on earth did that happen? When we ran back down the same trail, we never ran into that first hiker again after that, which was also strange. I mean, on a one-way hike like that, we expected to see her again, but we just didn't. Let me just say before I begin that I'm really not one to believe in ghost stories, but this is by far the scariest thing that I've ever experienced. I was 17 at the time, and had just gotten my driver's license. I'm originally from Southern California, and my mother wanted to visit an Orthodox Christian monastery in the Arizona desert. It's decently far from any major city, but she wanted to let me drive there to improve my driving skills, and also decided that we should leave at night around 7 p.m. because this was July and temperatures on these roads were like 100+ degrees during the day. We were going to stay with her friends that she'd known since like college who owned a property close to the monastery. And this is where it gets weird. For most of the drive, it's very uneventful and just driving on highways. Eventually, we branch off from the main road down a smaller road that leads to the community by the church. We were about 45-50 minutes away at this point, and we'd been driving for like 5 hours and were pretty tired. We were the only car on the road that we could see, and it was very dark out there. Not pitch black, but impossible to see more than like 20 feet. We stopped at a 3-way intersection because there was a truck on the other side that looked like it needed to turn that would have had the right of way, but it was stopped completely with one headlight on and the other off, presumably broken or something. The first thing that was weird that happened though was that the radio in our car that was on suddenly began to become very distorted right before getting to this intersection, despite the fact that it had been perfectly clear at every point up until now. I noticed also that the truck had no front license plate, and when I drove beyond that truck, I saw the most horrifying thing that I have ever seen. The person in the driver's seat, they had no eyes, just black hollow sockets, and their facial proportions were completely wrong. Their neck was really elongated, and their mouth was open, which was also completely black, while all the way down to a level that would not be possible for a normal human. It was honestly like it was screaming. Its skin looked fake too, like it was wearing a human mask of sorts, and there was a sudden chill in the air as soon as I looked at it. And honestly, the only way that I can describe this is that I immediately felt like I was in the presence of a great evil. I slammed the gas pedal and took off at like 100 miles per hour for a few minutes, and my mum saw the same thing that I did, and we were both near to wetting ourselves, honestly. We eventually reached the place where my mum's friends stayed, and we told them about it. And they said that strange things happen in the desert at night, and that it's better to not pay too much attention. I have never had any experience close to this before or since then, and whenever I think about it, I still get chills all over my body. At my old job, 2 of my co-workers and I had to go on a work trip. One of them was a man and the other was a Muslim woman who wore a hijab. I know. Why is that relevant to the story? Just bear with me here. So, everything went well at first. We just did what we were there to do, and the first night I was really tired, so when my co-workers invited me to go to dinner, I turned them down and I went back to my hotel room. The next day, my male co-worker was acting kind of quiet, I guess, and insisted that I sit in front of the car instead of the back. Weird, but I didn't think too much of it. After our shift, my female co-worker invited us to have some drinks in her room, and I thought, well, why not? Just a couple of beers wouldn't hurt. At first, everything was fine. We drank, talked, had a bit of fun, but then, all of a sudden, she started hitting on the male co-worker, telling him that he should remove his shirt. Mind you, he's happily married, and so is she. I guess he got uncomfortable and told us that he was going to bed. Before anyone says to, I should have said something, I know. Both of them were much older than me, and this was my first job. I thought that they were flirting in some sort of a weird way or something. Since I'm kind of an awkward person and didn't want her to think that I wouldn't hang out alone with her, I stayed, which was a huge mistake. Up until then, her behavior towards me wasn't all that alarming. She started showing me pictures of her kids and family, but then she pulled up the Instagram page of some model. Not many followers, but obviously a physically attractive guy, and she told me that they were apparently having an affair, and that she'd soon be divorcing her husband to run away with this man. Her demeanor completely changed, too. She had those sort of crazy eyes now. Now, without sounding too mean, let's just say that she wasn't exactly physically attractive, so I thought, what the heck? But I didn't say anything. Just kind of nodded along because, I mean, who am I to judge anyone, right? Anyways, I figured that she was just trying to impress me or something, so no major alarm bells yet. But then she started showing me paparazzi-style pictures of him, pics that she'd clearly taken without his knowledge, pictures of where he worked, his friends, his family, and even more stalker sort of like stuff. And suddenly I felt sick to my stomach. You know that feeling when something is just wrong? Like, you know that you're in danger and you need to get out? She had this weird look in her eyes, and then out of nowhere, she took off her hijab and she only had a few strands of hair, lots of bald spots, like something out of a horror movie almost. I know that that might seem a bit like harsh or whatever, but honestly, it was frightening. And she also had that crazy look in her eyes, and it was just too much. I wish that I was making this up too, but my stomach dropped and every part of me was screaming suddenly to run. So I told her that I was getting kind of tired and I should probably get up and get some sleep, and I stood up to leave. She just said, okay, in this sort of weird flat tone. The next day, she acted completely normal. I later talked to a male co-worker and asked him why he had seemed so tense after being alone with her, and he just said that she made a move on him apparently, and it was a bit weird. Honestly though, she seemed like some sort of a weird stalker, and let's just say that I won't be ignoring my gut feeling ever again after this. This is going to be a little bit long, and also it's going to be a little bit scattered, as this happened about 9 to 10 rough years ago, and so it's all a little bit all over the place. So, when I was 10 years old, I moved into this house directly across from my best friend. It was my dream, as I was an only child, and that family saved me and gave me solace. I, however, had to go back to a madhouse every night, and the first experience that I remember in that house is driving back from Pop Warner practice. My buddy Harold got out of the car before me, and he sort of pauses, turns to me as I'm scooting out, and says, "Is your grandfather at your house right now?" My grandfather lived in Red Bluff, 2 hours away. I was living in East Bay, California at the time. My other grandfather, Karen, lived in Georgia. Weird, though, as I thought it was, I didn't have any experience with the other side, so I just said no and I trudged on. When I turned 15 to 16, we still lived in this house too. It seemed like things took a bit of an odd turn at one point, and looking back, it seems like things took a bit of an odd turn at some point. I skipped 5 to 6 years because I really don't remember anything particularly terrifying happening in that time, but sort of just your run-of-the-mill stuff. Did I leave this here? Why do I feel like I'm being watched? I need to walk faster past the middle room. Why, when I'm walking past, do I feel like crying? We'll touch on some of this later, but it was a 3-bedroom house, small, narrow hall with an attic, and it was a little bit creepy is all I'm trying to say. So, I was 15, and my first experience that I had that made me have zero questions whether there was a spiritual presence among us or another side was, I constantly had this looming fear of something in the corner of my room, just sort of giving off this awful presence. I had a white chihuahua at the time, Sika, a real one, and at one point I woke up locked in sleep paralysis, and in the corner was a woman, old, not haggard, not expressive, and just sort of there. And well, I remember for some reason that Sika also took notice. She started growling in her direction. The lady seemed to take a deep breath, and she let out a horrifying sound. I instantly snapped out of the paralysis. However, my dog Sika was in a fully induced grand mal seizure now. She does still get them from time to time, but before this she had never had one. So it could have been an odd coincidence, but I don't know. Something tells me that that woman, that she was the onset for Sika. Anyway, after that the doors blew open, and it turned out that we would constantly feel the spirit of an old man, woman, and whatever was in there. My mother and I had both had multiple instances of waking up with a woman leaning over us, yelling in our face, dropping something in the middle of the room. My mother even heard a growl at one point. I personally never heard that, though. But we would constantly feel people sitting next to us, hear footsteps walking around through the leaves and onto the deck, stopping as soon as they hit the sliding glass door. What helped me solidify that we weren't crazy and stressed out, though, was that others were experiencing said experiences too when I was gone. My first girlfriend, best friend Anthony, a guy named Joseph, a guy named Jack, Emily, Chris, Lindy, even my mum's friend Kelly had experienced something. Pretty much anybody that was at that house more than once experienced something like this as well. When it was Christmas time, Joseph and I were in that narrow hallway that I mentioned earlier. It was right outside of the middle room, and we were in front of that dreadful room trying to find our Christmas presents. If we were parents, then that's where we would have put them, sort of logic. We bust the ladder out. I'm holding the base of it while he climbs up. He pops open the attic and is reaching his hand around, when out of nowhere, his body sort of slightly jerks, and he pretty much throws himself backwards out of it, picks himself up, jogs to the living room and says, "Something just tried to pull me upwards. I think we should get out of here." So we did, and we went to my friend's place across the street. There were just so many isolated instances too, and I feel like I'm rambling here a bit, so let me try to get some order about this thing. So one night I was playing Modern Warfare 2 in my bedroom. My bedroom was at the start of the narrow hall, and you sort of walk into the house, walk straight through the living room, and you could turn right into the kitchen, head down into the forbidden hallway, or turn left to go to my room or a bathroom there as well. My mother called me out of my room all of a sudden, and she seemed a little bit uneasy. I asked her what's up, and she asked me if I went to the garage to change laundry or anything. I told her no, that I was playing Modern Warfare 2 with some friends. And well, apparently she had seen a man, similar to my dimensions, walk out of my room, through the kitchen, and disappear into the garage, and when she went to look, there was nobody there. Odd, right? On another occasion, I was using the restroom, and my mum hadn't gotten home from work yet, and I got off school at 3, walked home with my best friend. She always got home at 5. Instantly, I dropped my backpack and I ran into the bathroom, and as I was sitting there, it sounded like a large human walked up to the door and just sort of banged on it. It repeated over a few times, and then it just stopped. I was petrified, and I just could not leave the bathroom until my mum got home, which was like 2 hours or something. On another occasion, I was smoking. This is the only story that I was actually high for, but I had snuck out to my car, hotboxed it, and then planned on going back to watch the Boondocks. And well, when I cracked the door back open, I saw what I thought was my mum staring at me around the corner. 5 minutes go by, I check again, and she's still there, motionless. So I text her, "Are you up?" and there's no response, and I open the door, but she's no longer there. As I'm walking in, a major seventh key was chorded on our piano. I sprinted to the room so fast that I don't think the sound had bellowed out yet before the time that I even got there. On another occasion, my mum had gotten home with groceries, and I was playing Modern Warfare 2 as usual, so I didn't hear her come in until she started dropping stuff on the counter. I sort of reluctantly leave the match that I'm in to go and help her. I walk out of my room and she's in the kitchen, walking towards me for a hug. And then there was just this boom out from the middle of the room. And all of a sudden, a older looking woman walks out of the room and beelines it straight towards me. I froze and became white. I'm mixed, and my mum said that I looked albino, but I told her what I just saw, and she wanted to question me, and I snapped and said, I know what I saw. Please don't think that I'm telling anything besides the truth. She believed me because I said the F word out of context to her, and I personally think that it was one of the spirits that walked around the house often. I only saw her for a brief moment, and I blinked and she was gone. My friend Emily had come over a while when I was sick at one point. We were in the living room and I had the Wolf of Wall Street on. Emily was talking away too much about a topic that was bothering me, and I was getting pretty upset, and when I told her to be quiet with some bass, at some instance she sort of got teary-eyed, and she suddenly said that it felt like she was choking, smelled fire, and felt a dire need to, exit the premises. She texted me that she was fine as soon as she left our neighborhood. Raising our voices and getting passionate is pretty common among us, as we view each other as family and hold each other to those sort of standards. But it had never happened prior to that or afterward, just in that particular moment, in that house again. Mum's friend Kelly, she claims that she's a medium, which I'm not sure how I feel about that, to be honest. I am a believer, of course, but I'm not sure to what degree, I guess. I'm still sort of figuring that out, I suppose. I don't think that there's a dollar amount that you could pay Kelly to stay there alone, though, as she said that she has never, ever felt so much dread from a place. Just bad guttural sadness is how she described it, which was often reflected in that house, I suppose. The middle room was our office, and me and my mum's buffer room, I suppose you could call it. She always liked having a sense of freedom, or a place where we could sort of have personal space. One problem, though, is that whatever occupies that area believes that it belongs to them. There were multiple instances of old-timey music being played out of that room. My first album was Curtain Call by Eminem. We were not an old-timey household by any means, is what I'm getting at. Multiple instances where we would see somebody dancing and then sort of stop on a dime when you notice them. An office chair would roll around when we were watching TV, lights on, off, the door opening and closing, shoulders being touched, or the man's and the woman's face popping into yours when trying to write an essay all of a sudden. Thoughts that felt like they were being forced on you sometimes, and as soon as you left, the feeling would peel back. There were also kiss marks on the mirror, constantly. My mum and I both kissed the mirror, not matching prints by any means. I believe that she has a picture of this one too, but I'll ask and follow up accordingly, and it could have been my girlfriend at the time, I admit, but she also found kiss marks on her vanity as well. I'd like to believe that my ex had no reason to go into that room alone, so honestly, who really knows, but I thought that it's worth mentioning. Jack and I, another friend, we were on Omegle at one point in time. We had gotten tired of constant spiritual warfare in the middle room, so we moved the computer to the living room. We lost the battle right there, and we were being just stupid teenagers, I guess, when all of a sudden a plate in the kitchen shattered in the middle of the kitchen, as if somebody picked it up, walked over and just sort of let it fall. We had previously cooked, so we tried to chalk it up to just the water tension holding it or gravity doing its thing. The only unsettling thing, though, was that it was way too far away for it to be slowly letting gravity work on it and fall. My mother, she fostered dogs at one point too, and there was not a single dog, not one of them, where I didn't have to stand up for them at some point. I watched at one point every single dog be scared of a presence that wasn't there, and had to sort of backpedal into their cage and would stay there, despite recall commands, food offerings, I mean, you name it. There was a particular dog, though, named Billiam. Billiam was a beautiful, pure-breed American bulldog. I would give Bill an honest 115 as well. We took him in because he tore his ACL. Previous owners didn't have the money or time to rehab properly. Billiam has now passed away, but spent the majority of his life with a Google exec. We got plenty of videos and he was loved. And well, that dog Bill, I would constantly find him backed into a corner or backed into his cage. Mind you, this is the same dog who tore my mum's friend's knees apart just from leaning too hard into her. I mean, he was an absolute brute, which begs the question, what could have had him in that sort of terrified state like that? I've never seen such a masculine dog cower like that. I would sometimes watch the lights go on in sequence, from sort of like the side yard light turning on, the porch light, the living room light, the backyard light, in a sort of strobe-like pattern from time to time as well. My mother and I, our relationship eventually fell apart, and I guess you could blame it on me being a fatherless teenager, but my mum was my best friend. But moving into that house, it really changed our dynamic greatly. We were in constant battles with one another over stuff that, honestly, we talked about other times in normal conversations with love and acceptance. Constantly thought that we were conspiring against one another, and just generally had a horrible tone of rage towards one another. But we moved, and what do you know, it stopped completely. In fact, we really didn't realize just how bad it had gotten until we moved. Now, I'm sure that there's plenty more somewhere in my brain about all of this, but I just wanted to get these off of my chest. If you have any questions, then please do feel free to ask. This was near Clayton, California, by the way. Old haunted land, and the house was built in like 1973, if my memory serves me correctly. So fairly new. In any case, as I always say, remain brave and upright, and lead with love. This happened to me around a year ago, and quite honestly, it still haunts me. At the time, I, female and 25, was visiting some friends. It was the middle of the week, but I was on vacation, so I stayed out late. Around 1 or 1:30 a.m., I got into my car to head home, about a 30-minute drive. I live in a small German town on a main street, but it's certainly not very big. At night, during the week, there's barely any traffic. Maybe 1 or 2 cars every now and then, but really that's it. A bit of context that might help too is that, coming from the direction that I drove, you can see down the road for quite a while. Maybe 600 to 700 meters, something around 2,000 feet. I rent a parking spot in an underground garage, shared with 10 other tenants. The garage entrance is tucked away beside the building and somewhat hidden by the surrounding houses. It isn't really visible unless you're, like, standing right in front of it, in other words. Anyway, I was driving home. It was a typical spring night. Everything was normal. I pulled into the driveway, stopped for a moment to open the garage door with my remote. Then I backed into my parking spot, which faces the entrance. I left the engine running as I rummaged into the center console for a bit. I can't even remember what it was for, but suddenly when I looked up, there was a stranger standing there. A man, maybe 45 years old, about 3 meters or 10 foot in front of me, inside the garage, just staring at me. As you can imagine, I was instantly terrified. Reflexively too, I hit the lock button on my car. He shouted that I should give him my phone, saying that his car had broken down and he needed to make a call. But I hadn't seen any broken down cars or flashing hazard lights anywhere on the road. No car pulled over, nothing. I was so frozen in shock that I just sort of stared at him. He seemed to notice how confused I was. He added that the breakdown happened the next town over, which, by the way, is about an hour's walk away. Again, he told me to give him my phone, becoming louder and more aggressive now. That's when I realized what he was not wearing. Just knee-length checkered shorts and no shirt. It certainly wasn't freezing outside, but it definitely wasn't warm enough to be standing around half naked like that. I yelled through the closed window that I couldn't help him and asked him to leave. He, still angry, said, "You don't need to be afraid of me. Just come and give me your phone." I told him that I was sorry, but no, and that he needed to leave now. He stared for a moment longer, then angrily walked out of the garage. I stayed in my car until the garage door was fully closed, and only then did I turn off the engine. I wanted to call a friend, but there was no reception in that garage, so I grabbed my keys, every bit of courage that I had, and sprinted to the door leading into the apartment hallway. It's a heavy door that jams sometimes, but thankfully not that night. There's also a back entrance from outside to the garage, and I had no idea if that door was locked or if the man even knew about it. Once inside, I ran to my ground floor apartment. The windows are somewhat shielded by a hedge leading to my entrance, but technically it's still reachable from the street. And once inside, I locked everything, shut all the blinds, and just sat there for several minutes before calling a friend. I debated calling the police, but in the end, I didn't, thinking that they may have had more urgent matters to deal with, since actually the man hadn't done anything to me. Looking back, I realized that that was a mistake, but honestly, I was just completely rattled. And look, I'm usually someone who's happy to help people, but he easily could have asked me to call someone from outside, or knock on a door somewhere, or anything other than following a young woman into a garage at night, half naked like that. That's just really a huge nope. I never did see him again, thankfully, but ever since that night, I just hate parking there. I never get out of my car until the garage door is fully closed, and even then I'm always on edge. I'm just really grateful that I kept the car running and I actually locked the doors. I'm grateful my parking spot is right across from the entrance, so I had a clear view. I'm grateful that the door didn't stick that night. And honestly, I'm just grateful that I hadn't got out of the car earlier as well. I really don't want to imagine what could have happened if I had. While visiting the Gingerbread Islands in the Bahamas, I went for a walk through a wooded area with a friend one day. The path was a narrow, winding road lined with sparse dead trees and dry brush. The setting was quiet, secluded, and unmistakable. The sun had begun to set, casting the landscape into a fading golden light, enough to clearly distinguish detail with 20 to 30 feet. Maybe about 30 seconds before the visual encounter, I experienced an overwhelming shift in perception. Just deep primal dread and flight is the only way that I can describe it. My heart dropped into my stomach and I was overwhelmed by a warning. It was not a reaction to any visible stimulus. Even in bodily warning, subconscious but unmistakable, the strongest flight response that I had ever felt, even compared to close-range encounters with sharks while freediving. As I was rounding a bend in the trail, we came across a small clearing where, no more than 30 feet ahead, crouched an unidentified creature. I had never seen before, and haven't seen since, anything like this. No taller than 4 feet when crouched, completely hairless, uniformly smooth, pale white skin, tight over its skeletal frame with no visible muscle definition. The body, extremely thin and emaciated, vertebrae visibly protruding down the back, long limbs with loose folded skin at the elbows and wrists, only bone beneath skin. The hands, 4 elongated fingers, each tipped with sharp black nails. The face, no visible lips, 2 small slits above the mouth resembling nostrils, eyes entirely black, numerous small tiny teeth smeared with blood. The eyes, entirely black, void-like without pupils or whites. It turned abruptly, but it locked eyes once. It turned and fled on all 4s, disappearing into the forest. The movement resembled that of a human attempting to run on all 4s. Unnatural, jarring, but coordinated still. Upon seeing it, we sprinted back to the marina. I recounted the encounter to others who dismissed it as a dream or just an overactive imagination. I was never overwhelmed by nightmares, and I have not seen it again. I am knowledgeable about the local nature and wildlife too, and I was very overwhelmed with what I saw that day. I have never come across a creature that matched the description or knowledge of what I had seen. The creature did not appear overtly hostile, I suppose. I felt a sense of dread and a subconscious drive to flee, but once I locked eyes with it, I sensed curiosity rather than aggression, I guess. It even appeared to almost smile before it ran away. I didn't feel haunted afterward, but I did feel watched, I guess. Not in my home, but in a sort of abstract way. Almost as if something had taken notice of me. I had no nightmares, but often woke up tired and paranoid, and I never again experienced the insanity of fear that I felt in those 30 seconds before it revealed itself. So, has anyone here experienced anything like this before? I think the year was 1997 when this happened. I was around 9 or 10 years old at the time because I remember being in the 4th grade. One night, when we were all sleeping, I suddenly got woken by a loud thud on our roof. The roof is made up of metal sheets. Also, I should probably mention too that the neighbors, they're not really present at this time. Pretty much we're always alone in that area, and it's mostly trees surrounding our home too. My first thought was that it must have been one of our chickens. Usually our chickens fly on our roof if something startled them at night, but then as soon as I heard the next thud, I knew that it was something big, like at least human-sized. Also, I know the distinct sound of the chicken claws when they walk on the roof like that. You can clearly hear that it's a chicken, but by this time I was already a bit terrified. I was thinking at that time that maybe someone was trying to rob us. My first thought was to wake up everyone too. So I looked down my bunk bed and was planning on going down when I saw my babysitter already standing beside my brother's bed, which was under me, and I whispered, "Did you hear that as well?" And she replied, "Yes, be quiet." And then I slowly went down and stood beside her. Our babysitter was a small lady, almost same height as me in fact when I was 10. Thin, so the thought of someone robbing us with just this small lady, an elderly woman, and my 2 little brothers was pretty scary, to be honest. We were listening closely to the footsteps in the room, and it sounds like it was circling around in the area where our room was. You cannot see anything outside as well because it's like pitch black at this point. By this time, I was behind her when she decided to lean in front of the window to hear what it was. But suddenly, the footsteps, they stop. And then, there was this stench. It was a rotting smell. Me and the babysitter look at each other and covered our noses, when suddenly, out of nowhere, something crashes into the window and made a huge bang. Thankfully, our windows have that sort of metal screen for mosquitoes, so nothing broke and nothing got in, but we both screamed and the babysitter started to pray at this point, and my brothers woke up at this stage too. I was hiding in my sheets and crying, and the babysitter told us to sleep and that everything was going to be okay. But I could tell that she was visibly scared as well, as she was crying too and praying. I was not able to sleep after this, and it was followed up by a terrible sleep paralysis after maybe about 3 or 4 hours of just sitting there. I think it took place when I finally got too tired and I must have fallen back to sleep. I'm 37 now and I have 2 kids of my own, and this experience, it still haunts me to this day a bit. I always bring it up whenever me and my brother get together, and they remember it too, but it seems like it didn't have as much of an impact on them as it did to me. Whatever the case, I haven't experienced sleep paralysis since then, and I will never forget that night, just how scared we all were. Last summer, I relocated from Seattle, Washington to Washington, D.C. metro region. My new job paid for a moving company to relocate my furniture, and even my car, but I opted to take 3 to 5 days to drive across country with my friend, assuming that I may not have this opportunity or even determination again. My friend and I are both young women, around 30 years of age, and had already done some research into where we'd like to stop and how long we anticipated being on the road for daily, roughly 12 hours, including detours. Our first day was a bit different, as we left after and stopped at Spokane. The next day, we were planning to do some small detours, with the possibility of stopping at any scenic viewpoints while in the Rockies. Our hotel that evening was planned to be in Dickinson, North Dakota, which really is the largest town or city beyond Bozeman. As we approached the North Dakota border, there's still some traffic on the highway, but a lot of trucks that we had noticed pulled off at various stops earlier. It was around 11 p.m. by the time that we entered North Dakota, and we were somewhat bummed as Dickinson was still an hour away at this stage. Beach is the first town after the border, and they have a large gas station there with lots of truckers stopped, and a welcome center just off of the exit. So we stop at the gas station for gas, and obviously, as 2 young women at night in an unfamiliar town are slightly uncomfortable, I pump the gas while my friend goes to use the restroom inside. We both had noticed that there only appeared to be men around, at least visibly. I particularly took notice while pumping the gas that a car parked near the entrance had a man inside. I could see the amber of a cigarette going in and out, as well as the reflection of a light on the pair of glasses that I felt were staring right at me. I was uneasy and was caught between trying not to look, but also trying not to let his car out of my sight too. Once my friend returns, we quickly get out and back onto the highway, and as the driver, I exceed the speed limit as much as I feel comfortable with, close to 90 miles per hour. For anyone familiar, there is almost nothing between Beach and Dickinson, and the night gets incredibly dark out there. It had to have been 10 to 20 minutes into driving that my friend tells me that there are headlights behind us that have been steadily keeping the same distance. Perhaps for my own mental capacity, I just tell her that it's a highway and that we're going as fast as we can and that it's normal. Minutes later, she complains that it is still there at roughly the same distance. As rattled as I was, I assumed my friend was paranoid until we got off of the exit at Dickinson. You see, I was at a light waiting to take a left when what I assume was the car pulls up behind us, very close too. I see the glow of a cigarette being smoked, and the man in glasses. He's maybe around 40, white, shaggy hair and light facial hair. My friend turned around and I told her not to. I was worried that he'd get out of his car. I mean, it was just us at that light stop, and there was little traffic, and so I was tempted to run it when it finally turned green. He's still following me as I turned into our hotel, and though I'd normally park in a spot, I pull into the loading area, and my friend and I get out and lock the car. There is no one at the front desk, and this hotel won't open the second set of sliding doors after 11 p.m., which means that we're stuck in the entrance corridor buzzing the bell when this car parks and he gets out. The man walks towards the door and is quite short. I think he could have been taller than my friend or I, but not by much, and says something like, "You ladies staying here?" When finally the desk attendant opens the door. Suddenly, the man turns away, and once we enter, neither of us see him again. We tell the desk clerk that we think someone was following us, and he tells us that the doors will remain locked. He was nice enough to get another employee to come and help us unload our car and help us park it as well. When we woke up, I was convinced that the car would be tampered with in some way, but thankfully it was fine. I have no idea what that guy wanted, but it was pretty chilling, and I don't get why he drove an hour away just to ask some sort of nonsensical question like that. Ever since then, any time that I travel, I always limit driving at night and ensure that I fill up my gas during the daytime, because you just never know who you might run into. This happened to my friend and her cousin at a Target store one day. They were in the candle aisle minding their business when two young women in their early 20s walked up to them. One of them said, "Can I smell that?" referring to the candle that my friend was holding. Then it got unsettling. Out of nowhere, one of the women took a completely different candle from a different section of the store and put it directly in their faces without asking and told them to smell it. It was not from the same aisle, and it looked like she had brought it from another part of the store or something, just to use as a weird excuse to start a conversation, it seemed. My friend immediately felt like something was off. They started asking questions. What's your names? Where do you live? What do you do for work? When my friend gave vague answers, they pushed for specifics like what neighborhood, what exact job. It felt invasive quickly. Then they brought up how they were into fitness and looking for friends with an active lifestyle. They mentioned several hiking trails and tried to make plans with them. My friend and her cousin politely said no, but the women kept pushing the idea. They just wouldn't let it go. As my friend tried to move on, the women suddenly asked about their jewelry. Then again, they circled back to the hiking idea for a third time. It felt like they were trying to keep them talking as long as possible, almost. Then came the phone number ask. My friend declined and asked if they had a social media. They said no, and then pushed for her number again. They asked up to 4 separate times, ignoring the no each time. Eventually, my friend just walked off, but she noticed the two women didn't leave. They stood in the exact same spot for about 5 minutes, not shopping and just watching them. 10 minutes later, as my friend and her cousin were leaving the store, they saw those same women outside, now talking to a young couple. They noticed the girl putting her number into the woman's phone. Quite honestly, it was like they were just waiting for their next targets. This whole interaction felt fake and calculated. The candle being from a different part of the store made it feel planned. The personal questions, the pushy behavior, the constant attempts to stay in contact, all of it felt like a setup. Maybe trafficking, possibly a scam. Either way, it did not feel safe. Stay alert out there, guys, and always trust your gut when something feels off. By the way, yes, police, Target, and the shopping center security, they have already been made aware of this encounter, and they'll be keeping an eye out and following up. Back in fall of 2021, my now husband and I were moving from Iowa to Maryland. We were driving late into the evening to get to our halfway point in Ohio before stopping for the night. The countryside from Iowa to Ohio is pretty barren. I believe that we were in Indiana at the time too. The fields just for miles and miles. But we were driving late, and sometime after dark we go through a thick patch of fog, and suddenly there's this horrible blood splatter on the road where it looks like someone hit an animal on the highway or something. And I mean, not a small amount of blood, a lot. It must have been a big deer, and it looked fresh, but there was no carcass on the road or at the side of the road, and no viscera, just blood. This is not the main part of the story, but it made us feel weird at the time, and I thought that I should mention it. So, a while later we were needed to stop at the gas station and use the bathrooms. So we drove until we found a gas station, literally in the middle of nowhere. I think it was called something like Woody's or something like that. And there was a diner attached to the gas station too. We pull into the parking lot, and it's pretty dark and pretty much empty as well. Only one truck in the parking lot. We get some gas and then park and walk up together to the station to use the bathrooms. The entryway of the gas station is filled with gambling machines, and every one of them is being used by someone, even a couple of preteen kids, which I thought was strange. There's also a few guys chatting to the cashier, and when we walk in, the weird vibe from earlier on the road, it suddenly feels like it's getting weirder. Everyone stares at us as we walk in. Neither of us feel comfortable as we walk towards the bathrooms. At the end of the hallway that has the bathrooms, there's a glass door there that looks into a sort of most unexpected thing. It's a dead end behind the door with a very dusty curtain, in front of which has been posed a scene with mannequins that look absolutely ancient. The mannequins are displayed as a 50s family, eating in a diner table being served by a waiter, a mum, a dad, and two kids, and a waiter bent over with a tray and a wide grin. I don't know entirely why, but this makes us feel incredibly unsettled. We stared for a second, noticing the dust and the flies on the table. The mannequins, they are ancient and peeling, looking like they might be really from the 50s or something. Clearly, this is blocking the connecting door to the diner, and I cannot describe just how off the vibes felt. We look at each other and use the bathrooms as fast as humanly possible, and when we come out and go back into the main gas station area, it is now completely empty. Everyone who is using the machines are gone. The guys and the cashier are gone. And I mean, we weren't in those bathrooms more than a couple of minutes. Well, we speed walk out and we get back into our car because something was really off about that place and just the night in general too. I mean, what cars did all those people come in, and where the heck did they go? What the heck was with those disgusting mannequins? Why did we feel so strange when nothing was obviously a threat? We drove the rest of the way to Ohio feeling like we had almost gotten into something that we shouldn't have. I suppose none of these events in particular are what people might say are scary, but they certainly stuck in our minds, and remembering that place always gives me the heebie-jeebies. I really don't know where else to share this, so that's why I'm here. Something super weird happened to me today, and I still cannot wrap my head around it. I haven't told anyone because really I just don't know what to make of it. So, a few years ago there was this pizza place on the outskirts of my town that closed down. It was always kind of a sketchy spot, and I never went there as a kid. But I heard that it used to have those kids' play areas with ball pits and inflatables. The place eventually closed down and the building was abandoned. I'd driven by it a bunch of times and even joked with my roommate about checking it out one day, but I never actually made any concrete plans of going in there. Last night I went to bed at around midnight after watching a movie, and quite honestly, that is the last thing that I can remember. Because the next thing that I know, I just wake up and, for the life of me, I had zero clue where I was. I was just sort of standing there with my phone in hand and the flashlight turned on. The place, wherever I was completely empty. I stumbled around until I finally found an exit, and when I stepped outside, I recognized the building as that pizza place. My car was parked right in front, and the keys were in the ignition. But I have no memory of actually going in there or how I even got in there. My memories just skipped from last night directly to right then, and it was around 4 p.m. When I got home, I asked my roommate a few questions, but I didn't say anything about what happened. And he told me that this morning I said that I was going to my aunt's for lunch, but I didn't say much else. I called my aunt to check, and she wasn't expecting me. And I definitely didn't go there. This is completely unlike me, and I seem to be fine. No bruises or cuts anywhere, and nothing was missing from inside the car or on me. But at this point, as you can probably imagine, I'm freaking out a little bit because I have no idea what happened between when I fell asleep and when I woke up at that place. Has anyone ever had something like this happen, and what is this? For some context, I was visiting my grandparents in my village, and I was around 13, maybe, at the time. Our house was a two-story, but the steps were outside instead of inside, and we had rented out the rooms on the ground floor at the time. Our bathrooms and kitchen were outside of our actual house, the bathroom being behind the kitchen on the far left side. Just think of a sort of typical village house in Asia and you probably get the drift. Anyway, at 3 a.m. I was watching TV as I usually do, because I have a hard time sleeping. I was watching Kitchen Nightmares or something like that. I had the urgent need to go pee and everyone else was asleep, so I decided to go alone. I took my phone and quietly made my way outside. Once I neared the bathroom, I suddenly saw a man-shaped shadow on my far right, but it was dark and my grandmother had a huge garden, so at first I wasn't sure if it was a person or a plant. After peeing, when I came out, I saw the shadow had disappeared though. So again, my rational brain thought that I was just tired and sleepy. Once the garden was out of my vision and I crossed the kitchen, I suddenly hear loud footsteps, almost right behind me, getting quicker. My flight response kicked in, and even without looking back, I ran up the stairs to my home. Once I reached the balcony, I looked back to see a dark shadow with slippers in his hands slapping the kitchen wall. I heard my family wake up, and they came outside to see what the commotion was all about. I was ushered inside while my grandpa shouted out at the figure to leave. I found out later that they thought that it was the infamous drunken neighbor at the time. I tried to fall asleep that night, but I couldn't, and hours later I heard my grandmother waking up and looking out the window. She went to sleep shortly after that, but it was complete silence for I don't know how long until I heard footsteps outside. They were circling my entire house, and it stopped after maybe 2 circles. I have no memory of falling asleep that night, but the next morning my family and I were all in the kitchen, and they convinced me that it was the drunken neighbor who usually goes around at night apparently. My grandmother said that she saw him standing outside when she looked through the window last night, but she said that she could see only his lower half, which is weird, but was pretty sure that it was him. Our neighbor actually came around that evening, and my grandmother was complaining to her about the drunkard when my neighbor looked confused. She said that wasn't possible, as he had passed away 2 days before the incident due to alcohol poisoning. And quite honestly, I have chills even thinking about this years later. What if I had not have run and I had gotten caught by whoever that was? That is a very terrifying thought. I have told many people this story over the years, but I still don't have anyone who could give me any insight about why or what it was. If anyone could tell me of any similar experiences, or people with psychic powers tell me what this was, I would be glad to finally unravel this mystery, because it has plagued me the entire time. When I was around 19, I was home alone one day, not feeling great, so I went to bed early that day. At some point during the night, though, I woke up groggy because I heard a car outside with its engine running. I remember thinking, well, that's weird, but I was too tired to care. I also vaguely recall hearing a knock on my bedroom door, but I assumed that it was just the house settling, as old houses do sometimes. Fast forward to the next day, my parents came home and casually asked, "Did anything happen last night?" I was confused, what? No, why? And then they told me that the entire street heard shouting and things being thrown inside of our home, like there was some huge fight going down. And apparently a car pulled up and 2 guys even got out to check if everything was okay. 4 different neighbors confirmed hearing the same thing, and I explained to them that I did hear the car, but there was no fighting. I still have no idea what happened, but the thought of it honestly freaked me out a bit at the time. But here's the weird thing. Another sort of interrelated thing happened when I was about 21. It was late at night and I couldn't sleep, so I decided to make myself a sandwich. As I walked downstairs, I suddenly got this weird, uneasy sort of feeling, like something was just off. Hard to describe, but I just sort of suddenly felt anxious, and for really no reason. I shook it off, made my sandwich, and grabbed my plate, but as I was heading toward the door to go back upstairs, I got hit with this overwhelming wave of fear. Just spontaneous, a kind of fear that I've never had before. Something in me just went, "Get out of here now, ASAP." So I stepped into the hallway, quickly shut the kitchen door behind me, and then I heard this scream straight from the living room. It was so loud too. It was a woman's scream, almost like a wail, but clear as day, as if she was right there in that room. Upon hearing it, I bolted up the stairs, completely terrified. The weirdest part, though, nobody in the house heard it. It was just me who heard it. To this day, I have no explanation for what happened. I have quite a few more stories, but I didn't want to share those because they're pretty long, but if anyone is interested, then I would be happy to share more details or talk about other strange things that I've experienced. But for now, if anyone has any theories as to what the heck this was, I would certainly love to hear them, because I think of these almost daily and it always just makes my skin crawl. This happened to me a few weeks ago, but it still sticks with me, and it always makes me double check all the locks now. So I was working an overnight security gig. I've been a guard for 15 years, and other than getting into brawls at nightclubs, happens more often than you think, I've had a pretty easy career, minus some contractor stuff that I did in Central America. The nights started the same way that they always do as well. I had gotten off my first gig and went to relieve the normal night guard, whose name was D. I arrive and D looks a bit frazzled. He's an old martial arts guy that works the apartment job for the same reason that I do, half off the rent. I walk in and ask him what's up. He says that he encountered a guy by the gate that, quote, gave him the heebie-jeebies. He asked if I would go back to my apartment and grab my carry firearm. I hesitantly agreed because, having worked in this industry long enough, guns rarely lead to good outcomes, but D is pretty scared, so I agree in the end. I go back and grab not only the gun, but my dog, a 120-pound Anatolian Shepherd. I suit her up in a harness and grab her cutie muzzle on the off chance that something does go down. I'd rather have the dog ready to go. I arrive and Dee is elated to get the heck out of Dodge, gives the dog her standard good girl chicken strip. This is a nightly ritual, regardless if it's okay or not, and takes off back to his apartment. I attach the dog's lead to my waist and we go on patrol. Now, I live in Texas and our apartments are sealed by gates that you have to have the code for, basically. I go and check the first gate and immediately come into contact with the person that Dee was so worried about. It's 93 degrees out, but this dude is wearing a trench coat with a hood, and before we even get near him, the dog starts going absolutely ballistic, hackles up in between my legs, snarling like some sort of feral monstrosity. I give her the command to chill, and she does, but what bothers me is the dude doesn't even flinch. I mean, most people see a dog that big barking and snarling and insist upon being no part of whatever it is the dog is protecting, in this case me. At this point, I step forward and initiate contact. "Hey buddy, how we doing? You alright?" The man turns to face me, and at this point, I see he's horribly disfigured. One eye missing but sealed up from surgery, the other eye a brilliant blue, and horrible scarring on the side of his face missing the eye. "Yes, I'm fine," he responds rather quietly, sort of in the way a child who's trying to fix something on their own might respond. "So, do you live here? Haven't seen you around. My name's H. You new in town, or has anybody ever told you that you have incredible eyes?" This simple statement made my blood run ice cold. At this point, I tap the cutie on the muzzle and it swings out of the way. I'd like to think my mother used to tell me that, but I can't say it's something that I hear often. "Hey, listen man, you gotta get moving, okay? If you don't live here, I can't have you standing out here like this." At this point, he sort of goes rigid and reaches in his pocket. I don't give him a chance to do much more as I draw my weapon at this point. "Hey man, look, you gotta leave and I'm not telling you again. I don't know where the heck you're from, but I know it ain't from around here, so last chance, get out of here." He sort of slowly removes his hand from his pocket, and he's holding this little 35mm disposable. He lifts it, snaps a photo, and then says, "Have a good evening, your eyes are beautiful." And then off he goes. About 5 minutes later, I'm still shaking when the cops arrive. Turns out that one of the apartments close to the gate heard the dog going nuts, and they heard me raise my voice to our oddball friend, and they called. They tell me that they'll up the patrols and that they hadn't got any other calls about the dude, but that they would keep an eye out for him. Something reminded me of this incident that happened a few years ago at a friend's apartment, and I thought that I would share it. So back before COVID, around 2019 or so, I went to a party that my friend, 19 and female, was throwing at her place. No occasion or anything, we were just looking for a reason to get drunk, really. Anyways, I showed up and it was a small group, maybe 5 other people, mostly guys. We're all having a good time. A few hours go by, and as we're chatting in the living room, I hear a knock on the balcony fence. For context, they were on the ground floor level, and their apartment was on the far corner of the property downtown in our city. We ignore it and continue on. Another knock follows soon after, and when we go to the balcony, we can't see anyone over the fence. We're all a bit confused, and we've turned the music down by this point, and another knock comes. Only this time, on one of the windows, and then again on the windows beside that one. It's getting closer to the front door until finally this person is knocking on the front door. When the peephole is checked, however, you can't actually see them, which means that they're either ducking down or hiding. So all of the guys tell us to get behind them and they're going to confront whoever is doing this. They grabbed whatever kitchen knives they could. I think someone had a broomstick too, which was a bit comical, but they busted out the front door. Me and the other girls followed behind, and to our horror, we see a single, very tall, skinny man crouched underneath the staircase with his right hand stuffed into his jacket pocket. His eyes looked yellow and bloodshot, and he immediately started to take off. The guys caught up and started questioning him, and he makes up some story about looking to get a haircut. They tell him to get out of here, and eventually he does. In all of that commotion, too, I noticed that he had left behind an envelope that was covered in glitter. It was empty but sealed and covered in blue and purple glitter, and my friend's car had the same blue and purple glitter sitting on the hood. We think that he must have assumed that she lived there alone, and was going to bait her to open the door so that he could force his way inside. She lived at the apartment with her boyfriend actually, but he didn't have a job, so he never left. To any onlookers, you'd only see her leave every day. And thank goodness she moved apartments not soon after that, and nowadays she's doing much better. But yeah, I really don't know what would have happened had there not been all of us there that night. I really hope that I never see that dude again, because the way that he was sitting there crouched up like that, it still haunts me. It wasn't in a passive sitting position or anything. Honestly, it was like he was ready to spring into action. So I was just 4 years old, and my parents had just moved my family into our first house. They decided to have a big family sleepover in the living room with my cousins, aunts, and uncles, and I remember that night that we watched Harry and the Hendersons, which was quite scary for me as a 4-year-old, and after the movie, we all went to bed. I remember this night really clearly too. It's possibly one of my earliest memories, in fact, but a cartoon girl woke me up. Her blonde hair and pink dress is still vivid in my mind to this day. She was holding a paint bucket and a ridiculously large paintbrush. She asked me to come outside with her because she wanted to paint some things, so I followed her out the front door. No one in my family woke up or noticed, by the way. The girl led me out to my father's truck parked on the side of the house. For context, I was a very small child and my dad's truck was tall and lifted. There's no possible way that I could get in on my own, or even reach the door handle to open it. I always needed to be picked up to get into it, and I also rarely ever rode in it. So technically, I wouldn't have been familiar with how to get in it myself. And well, anyway, she opened the truck door and then set her paint bucket on the ground for me to stand on to get into the truck. Also, yes, my dad didn't have his truck locked. We kind of lived in a neighborhood out in the middle of a bunch of farmland. My dad seems to think that nothing can happen out there, so he doesn't care to lock his truck or pretty much anything. Anyway, I don't know exactly what happened after I got on the truck, but I remember being locked in there and watching the cartoon girl walk away. Once I was alone, I was absolutely petrified. I felt like I was being watched, and I remember being horrified about that Bigfoot Harry from the movie coming out to get me. So I did what any 4-year-old would do, and I freaked the heck out. Luckily, my dad was working in the garage that night after everyone had gone to bed, and I guess I was screaming and crying loud enough that he had heard me from inside the garage. He ran inside the house and saw the front door wide open, still everyone asleep. So he then ran outside because, well, it sounds like I was being kidnapped, but he found me inside of the truck. It's still a huge mystery in my family to this day on how exactly I was able to get into that truck. My dad checked everywhere too, and there was just nothing that I would have been able to climb on to get inside, let alone even open the door. And it's been unexplained all these years. Ever since then, I have had countless paranormal encounters, and they seem to follow me around. But hey, it's kind of a cool story to tell when I want to spook anyone, so I hope you enjoyed it. I enjoy sleeping outside, and I have a tent in the back corner of my yard up against the woods. Usually around midnight, I go to bed and I step outside and my motion light brightens up the yard as I walk about 40 yards to my tent. I'll be on Reddit or listening to an audiobook, YouTube, Netflix, whatever. And the first night that I was out there after setting up my new tent, I was relaxing when I heard a scratching near the door of my tent. "Haha, very funny, good one. Now let me sleep," I said. Then off a bit in the distance, I hear both my teenage sons laughing. The next night, I hear coyotes very close. They frequent the high-tension lines just up the hill, and I hear them often, but this time it sounded like it was happening in my backyard, so I sat up, shut off my audiobook, and hit the record on my phone. It was pretty awesome and gave me chills just because it sounded so close. I could hear each individual coyote. It sounded like they were sort of attacking one of the pack, but anyway, the next night I hear them again, but much further away, and an owl who hauntingly hoots most nights. Later that night I hear scratching again, and tell them to go away as it must have been about 2 o'clock in the morning, perhaps even later. I fall asleep eventually, and same again the next night, but by now I know it wasn't my kids. I told them to stop the first time, and me having terminal cancer now, they do what I tell them. Some nights going to my tent as well, I see rabbits in my yard eating grass. Nocturnal rabbits? I don't know, but we have raccoons, opossums, squirrels, flying squirrels, fisher cats, and many others. I figured that something was brushing against my tent every night while grazing or whatever, but one night it was so loud and sounded so deliberate that I sat up and turned on my electric lantern and looked towards the noise, and see my shoes bouncing up and down on the tent floor. I thought to myself, oh my goodness, it's mice this whole time, or a snake, something that was comfortable beneath my tent. But last night was different. You see, I hear scratching again, this time on the opposite side where there is no door, where I'm up against the woods. It was definitely not an animal too, as it was up much higher and repeated a pattern-like scratching, like a record so to speak. I say out loud, "Leave me alone," as I slap the side of the tent with the back of my hand. I could either hear or feel footsteps on the wet grass because it moved away and brushed up against my head and arm and stopped there. I had this pressure against me and I didn't move because I was terrified. After about 15 seconds, I felt it slowly move away and stop probably a foot or two away from my tent. It was weird to hear myself say loudly, "The power of Christ compels you." I couldn't think of something better to say. It just came out and, well, it seemed to work. I wanted to go in the house, but I was too frightened to open my tent and break for the porch. So I turned my audiobook back on, but turned the volume all the way up, and somehow, eventually I fell asleep. Tonight, though, I'm sleeping in my bed, and tomorrow I will go through the video on a bird feed camera that might have caught something. Being a skeptic, I will assuredly make some more excuses on what it could have been, but I was so scared last night that now I think that perhaps one day, who knows, I may become a believer. I was just listening to other stories here, and I got a flashback to something abundantly strange that happened to me as a kid. I figured that I should share it here, otherwise, well, I'll probably forget it for like another 20 years again. So my parents took me and my brother camping. I guess the place is still there, Nelson's family campground, along Halesbrook in East Hampton. My brother and I used to slip quarters in the arcade machines that they had in this log cabin-y sort of main office thing, and we loved it. The trip itself was, well, pretty uneventful, really. Mum and Dad were nagging at each other and lightly fighting. Dad took us fishing at one point. We didn't catch anything, and he was kind of being a bit of a jerk. My brother and I were in Scouts, so we were pretty familiar with the outdoors. We went fishing and camping all the time with our uncle, who took us on more backwoods kind of trips. So we thought that this would be a breeze for us. It's like 4 a.m. one of the nights that I've got to pee. I've pretty much seen it all, and the campground is safe, and all I've got to worry about is skunks and possums. I put on a jacket and crawl out of my tent and walk over to the bushes. I'm standing there, member in hand, and I see this animal head with glowing green eyes low in the bushes, about 20 feet out, maybe a foot or two from the ground. I assume it's a possum, so I start to pee. And then I remember thinking, wow, that possum actually really looks like an alien, but as if it was a giant bug. My eyes adjust and I expect a possum face to appear, but no, an alien, but sort of looked like a praying mantis. It kind of sinks in how strange it is. The eyes are glowing green like that and not yellow, like a bioluminescent sort of thing and not a reflection. I recall it reminded me of fireflies at the time, and then my eyes actually adjust, and I see that not only am I right, but I also see that it has long, spindly arms. It's laying there in a position like it was doing push-ups. Its otherworldly and strangely long arms are bent at the elbow, which when bent, sit higher than its head. It sort of looked like a long letter M, I guess. I kind of digest all of this, as it were. I'm not dreaming, so I should probably panic, but I realize that if it's an alien, that they're only like 3 or 4 feet tall according to law, so I don't really care. I mean, I'll kick its butt, right? But then it stands up. Well, the head elevates, the arms straighten, and maybe it's just a human after all and some gangly creep. But the head keeps elevating. It would have had to have been 9 or 10 feet tall by the time that it was done standing up. I was just frozen there trying to tell myself how not real this was or the millions of things that it could be. Then I realize, no, what I'm seeing is what I'm getting. I'm looking at exactly what I think I'm looking at. I'm like 20 feet from this 10-foot tall mantis alien with glowing green eyes, and it's just me and him. Finally, I scream like my life depended on it, because it probably did. And then just everything kind of gets, well, hazy. I remember making it to the tent and hiding in my sleeping bag, and my brother reacting frantically. My parents are upset that I woke up the whole campground, and I tell them what happened. They walk over to where it was and see that it would have for sure been a few feet taller than adults, and I feel like I'm about to be sick. Meanwhile, I'm expecting a long, gangly arm to dart out of the brush and snag one of them. Thankfully, that never happened, but still, I was absolutely freaking out. I want to believe that it was a dream or a night terror, but my brother harassed me about it for a good 10 years before, well, unfortunately, he died. I guess the most unsettling part of it all was just how confident this thing was, like I was just inconsequential to it, and it was observing me with what I would describe as disdain. I was just this gross nothing to it, like it could eat me, but thank you, no thank you sort of thing. I don't know why I felt that way, but I distinctly remember that, and the whole event is not something that I think about that often, but like I said, my memory was jogged by another story, and so I thought that I would share this. A little while ago, I heard a chair move in the other room. I looked over and saw that it looked like the chair had been pulled out from under the table. I felt a bit weird about that, but I blamed it on the cat and went back to decorating my MySpace page. Yeah, I was like 13 at the time. About an hour later, I heard the chair move again though, and this time it was facing me. Again, I tried to blame it on the cat, but that's when I noticed that the cat was above me, on the printer, soundly asleep, and had obviously been there for quite some time. When I realized that, I had the craziest chill run up my spine, because we didn't have any other pets, and if something was in that chair, it was sitting there, and seemingly looking at me. I was so freaked out I ran into my sister's room and hid under her blankets. She didn't wake up but was really confused why I was in her bed in the morning. When I told her what had happened, she said that she had seen the ghost in the house too. Apparently, one night she woke up and saw a tall man in a cowboy hat standing at the end of her bed. In that moment, she thought that she was going to die and hid her face under the blanket, but nothing happened for so long, so she eventually looked and the man was gone. This was my mum's husband's house, and Apparently, he'd had multiple priests and mediums come through, and they all said the same thing, that there are 3 spirits in his house, and apparently one is a cowboy, the other is an old woman, and the third is an indigenous man. I don't know which one was messing with the chair that night, but I am super glad that I never saw the cowboy at the foot of my bed. I'm 16 now, and I've been dealing with something terrifying for as long as I can remember. It all started when I was 5, and honestly, I still don't fully understand what's going on. I know that some people won't believe me, but I need to share this, get it off my chest, and maybe someone out there has gone through the same thing and will know what to do. So, it all began when my mum, who was a single parent at the time, met my stepdad. He was super nice, and eventually we moved into his house. My stepdad had a daughter who was 8 years older than me, and I shared a room with her, but she wasn't around much because she was already dating and out with friends a lot. The house was old, like built in the early 1900s, and I remember feeling a bit creeped out almost immediately. At first, it was just nightmares. I was scared of the dark at the time, so I used to sleep in my stepsister's bed because it was closer to the hallway light. But every time that I slept in her bed, I had this awful nightmare where something chased me, trying to hurt me. I was only 5, so I didn't think much of it and just stopped sleeping in her bed. But then the nightmares started happening in my own bed too. It wasn't every night, but often enough to scare me. I couldn't really explain it to anyone because, honestly, who's going to believe a little kid saying that they're haunted? Over time, though, things got weirder. By the time that I was 7, we redecorated the room, and I started noticing, shadows moving at night and hearing random old-timey music. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and see shadows standing in the corner or behind the door. One night I woke up, but instead of being in my room, it felt like I was in my grandparents' old living room. It was completely empty, and even though I knew that I was awake, I couldn't see my room at all until I bumped my head on the door. That was when I started to seriously freak out, but I didn't tell anyone because I thought that they would just brush it off. By the time that I was around 9, though, I became convinced that it was the spirit of the old woman who used to live in the house. The reason for this is that the only owner before us was a 96-year-old woman who died in a retirement home, and I thought that her spirit had stayed behind. I'd see her shadow standing in the corner of the room where my stepsister's bed used to be, or I'd feel something pulling at my feet while I slept. Sometimes I'd see her standing behind the door, just a silhouette through the glass. I never really saw her face or anything, but I was convinced that it was her. I got to the point where I got used to her presence. I wasn't exactly comfortable with it, but it became a part of my life, I guess. That is, until things got worse. Her presence started to feel, more aggressive, I would say. She'd move around more, and her shadow looked less human, taller, skinnier, and somehow more threatening. The nightmares, they became more intense, and I could feel her in other parts of the house, not just in my room anymore. I'd hear footsteps on the stairs, like someone was walking around late at night, and the whole house just felt very off. This went on until I was about 10, and that's when I told my aunt about what I was going through, and she convinced my mum to have a priest come and bless the house. And weirdly enough, after that, everything stopped. For 2 years, no nightmares, no shadows, no weird noises, nothing. It was a huge relief for me at the time as well. But then, when I was about 12, my dog died, and everything started up again. I'd see my dog lying on my parents' bed, even though he was gone. Sometimes I'd hear something eating from his food bowl, even though our other dog was nowhere near it. And once, our kitchen clock, which had been hanging on the wall for years, randomly fell off and rolled all the way to my dog's food bowl. This time, even my parents noticed the weird things happening, but eventually they just sort of pretended like it wasn't real. They'd say that I was imagining things or that I was just overthinking it. Then, when I was 14, I invited a friend over for a sleepover one night. She believed me when I told her about the haunting because she said that she could see spirits. We decided to set up an experiment to see if we could catch anything on camera. We put cameras in the room, and the next morning we actually found something. There was a dark shadow lying between us in the bed, completely still like it was dead. The camera stopped recording at 3:30 in the morning, but what we saw freaked us both out. I showed the footage to my parents, hoping that they'd finally take me seriously, but they just made me delete it. I wanted to send it to someone who knew about this stuff, but they wouldn't let me. After that, things went quiet again for a couple of years, and genuinely I thought that maybe it was all over at this stage. But 6 months ago, everything started up again, and this time it's way worse. I've been dealing with depression for the past year, and somehow that seems to have triggered the activity again. The shadows are back, the noises, the feeling of being watched, everything. A few nights ago, I heard my brother's voice calling my name at 1:30 in the morning saying, "Come take a quick look," or something to that effect. But it didn't sound right. It was his voice, but it was like a recording maybe. Then it switched to my dad's voice saying the exact same thing. I didn't respond, and I'm glad that I didn't. I think that it feeds on fear, and I think it gets stronger with that or something. I'm going to see a medium tomorrow. Unfortunately, my best friend moved abroad, so I can't really ask her for help anymore. I don't know what this thing is or why it's attached to me, but I really, really need some answers. If you're going through something like this, please don't ignore it. Find someone who can help, whether it's a priest, a medium, or someone who understands. Don't let other people's disbelief stop you either. I'll keep you guys updated after I meet with the medium, but please, do wish me luck. This story dates back to spring of 2016. At the time, I was in my late 20s, I was young and fit with very long blonde hair. A total hippie chick that had quit her job to travel the US with my ex at the time, pre-pandemic before the van life or tiny home movement really took off. We left our home in the Midwest of January that year, after holiday celebrations saying goodbye to friends and family. By sometime in April or early May, we made it to southern Texas and decided to check out Padre Island National Seashore. For those of you unfamiliar with the location, it's a seashore that you can drive right onto with your vehicle. My now ex and I were in a 26-foot Class C 1976 Chevy motorhome. We drove into the island at nighttime, and waking up the next morning was the most insane and phenomenal experience. The ocean was a mere 15 feet away. I mean, the visual was absolutely breathtaking. I'll never forget it. We arrived on a Thursday or Friday, and the beach was beyond packed. Another thing for people unfamiliar with Padre is that it was where many Texans, high schoolers and college kids mainly, flock for their spring break. And spring break was just the week prior to when we got there, or maybe still going on. Either way, what I mean is that it was busy, and we had an awesome weekend partying away. During this weekend, we noticed that workers for the park would often drive down the beach. They're pretty protective of their sea turtle population there and would slowly drive by in marked vehicles a few times a day. And by Monday morning, we woke up to find the entire island emptied out. When I tell you that we were literally the only ones, both when you looked left or right, we were the only ones for what seemed like miles. It was a gorgeous morning too, so I walked the dog quickly and then came inside to sit at our pop-up dining room table to do some journaling. My ex was asleep on the very back couch. We were backed in with the windshield facing the ocean, so of course I took a seat looking towards the beautiful view. Maybe 15 minutes after I sat down to journal, a grey beat-up pickup truck drove by, kind of quickly, headed towards the direction of the park entrance. That was the first activity I'd seen on the island that morning, and I didn't think anything of it. However, maybe 5 or 10 minutes later, the same truck came driving back past our RV, this time much slower. The man driving the pickup was going so slow, in fact, that we made eye contact for several seconds as he went back by. He also seemed to drive closer to our vehicle in order to better see inside. Alarm bells should have been ringing at this point, but I kind of just shrugged it off. I was very much in my free spirit phase and was not easily off-put, and this is where it gets really creepy. So obviously, this guy needed to turn back around since he was driving away from the park entrance again, but I was honestly minding my own business. I kind of put him out of mind. But yes, several minutes later, the man came back, but this time he pulled directly up to our RV with his truck, essentially nose to nose at a 45-degree angle, to appear as if he were giving us a jump. Not far-fetched for a 70s vehicle on the salty beach, but he was blocking us in. It was now that my heart dropped and I began to get a bit scared. I screamed my ex's name immediately and he jumped up from the couch. I know that he could hear the panic in my voice, but I'll never forget just how quickly he got up and how he had his arms spread across while he ducked down to see through the windshield. He was 6'5", very bearded, and I'm 1,000% sure that he was the only reason that the man in the grey beat-up truck sped off like he did. It took several minutes for my heart rate to return to normal. My ex and I just looked at each other, because that was the most unusual encounter on our trip yet. Surprisingly, we stayed another week after that, in the same spot as well. The idea never entered my head that the man could bring reinforcement and come back for me or us. I was very foolishly fearless and naive back then, I know. Anyway, it wasn't until later that day that another fact dawned on me. When my ex and I had arrived over the weekend, we only pulled out one camping chair. That one camping chair was in plain sight next to our RV outside. Prior to this spot, we had never done that. We always got both chairs out. But we ended up using driftwood to sit on when we had our bonfires there. And so that was the nail in the coffin for me. The scary man in the grey truck absolutely thought that I was a young girl all alone. And I still wonder to this day, almost 10 years later, what all he had in mind for me that morning. Also, out of curiosity, I googled Padre Island National Seashore Murder, and it looks like a murder of an RV couple occurred there back in 2019, which honestly gives me chills.